All right, Algebra 1 students, we're back. 8.5c, this is the third part of section 8.5, and here, using the distributive property. This time, we've talked about, in the first one, we talked about factoring with, two terms. We've also factored about, and then last time we talked about factoring with 3 or 4 or more terms. And now we're going to talk about solving those types of equations by factoring. So solving, just one little extra step to it. Shouldn't be that bad. So you're going to do the same things you did in 8.5a and 8.5b as far as factoring, but then we're going to take it one step further and actually solve and get solutions. So that takes us to the zero product property, which is kind of what we're going to talk about most of the time today. So if the product of two factors is 0, so that means if you multiply two numbers and you get 0, then at least one of the factors must be 0. So for instance, 5 times 0 equals 0. So we got two things that multiply to make 0. So if the product is 0, then one of these two numbers has to be 0, obviously, because anything times 0 is 0. Okay, that's easy to see with 5 times 0, but what if it is something like 6 times x equals 0? Well, we know the 6 isn't 0, so in this case, our x would have to be equal to 0 here, because you'd have to have something be 0 to get 0 as your answer here. Okay, so all it just says is that if you've got an answer of 0, then something must be 0 that you multiplied by. Okay, so that's going to help us a lot. So you're going to hear me use the phrase like set it equal to 0, or solve means set it equal to 0. So you hear the term set it equal to 0, you're going to set something equal to 0 and then try to solve for it that way. Okay? So the next thing is steps to solve. First thing we want to do is we want to get all terms to one side of the equation and equal to 0. Okay? So sometimes that means that we have to do some work ahead of time. So if we have something like 3x squared equals x, well, we want to get everything on one side of the equation. So in order to do that, I would have to subtract x from both sides, which would then give me 3x squared minus x equals 0. And so now in that case, I'm ready to go because I'm equal to 0. Okay. The second thing we think is we have to factor. Some of these are going to be already factored for you, but if not, we got to go ahead and factor them first. So we must have parentheses here. So we're going to try to get it into a factored form where we have parentheses, and then we can set those equal to 0. So the problem must have parentheses in factored form. And then the last step we're going to do here is we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So when we say each factor, we're looking at like take each parenthesis and set it equal to 0, and then we're going to solve that way. And then just a reminder that these equations may have more than one solution. You could have more than one answer here, and you'll kind of get the idea when we go through some examples. So steps 1, 2, and 3, again, get the terms on one side, set them equal to 0, factor it if it's not already factored already, and then set each factor to equal to 0 and solve. So let's do some practice problems here. And these two are nice because they've already been factored. So these ones we can kind of skip right to step 3. They already have everything on one side of the equation. We've got it equal to 0. And then step 2, it's already in parentheses form. They've already been factored. So all we have to do here is we're going to set each of these parentheses, each of these factors, equal to 0. Okay? So I'm going to take this x plus 2, and I'm going to say x plus 2 equals 0. And I'm also going to take this x minus 3 here and set that equal to 0. X minus 3 equals 0. Because one of these numbers, either x plus 2 or x minus 3, one of these factors would have to equal 0 for our full answer to be 0. Okay? So x plus 2 equals 0. So how would I solve this? Basically, I'm going to subtract 2 from each side, and then x equals a negative 2. On this side here, how would I solve this one? I'm going to add 3 to both sides, so x is going to be equal to 3. And that is basically our answer right there. You got two different answers, negative 2 and 3. Okay? Now, I'm not going to ask you to, say, check this, but you could easily, by plugging either of these numbers in to the equation and then see if you can get the 0 answer. All right, so let's just do that just to show you. So if I plugged in a -2 here, I'd have -2 plus 2 is 0, and then I'd have -2 minus 3 is a -5. Well, 0 times -5 would equal 0. Okay? You could do the same thing with the 3. And see if I get 0 here. So if I take my 3 and plug it in here, I end up getting 3 plus 2 is 5. If I put the 3 in here, I end up getting 3 minus 3 is 0. And so 5 times 0, again, is 0. So we know that both of those work. Okay? Let's try this one over here. Again, we've already looked at step 1. Everything's on one side of the equation. We've got it equal to 0. Step 2, it's already been factored for us, so we can skip right to step 3. So we're going to take this whole factor, d minus 5, set that equal to 0. And let's go ahead and solve this one. And add 5 to both sides. It becomes nice and easy for us. D equals 5. And we know that that's going to work. Then I can take this piece here, this 3d plus 4, and set that equal to 0. Okay? So now a little extra step here because we've got a 3 in front of the d. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to subtract 4 from both sides, which gives us 3d equals a -4. And then I have to, of course, divide by 3. So then these cancel out. And, of course, my answer now is d equals -4/3. Might be a little more work to check it with the fraction, but no matter what, you plug either of these in, you're going to get 0 for your responses. Take each piece and set it equal to 0. All right, let's do a couple where we have to factor first. All right, so looking at this first one, number 3, 3x squared minus 15x. Okay, so if you can find the GCF, remember that's the idea, find the greatest common factor. And in this term, just looking at it mentally, if you can do it on your own, it would be 3x, because a 3x would go into both of those. That would be my GCF, would be 3x. If you didn't know how to do it mentally or just by kind of dividing, remember you can always use the prime factorization tree. 3 times x squared would be 3 times x, remember? And then -15x would be -1 times 3 times 5 times x. So now we look for the numbers that we have in common in both. Well, they both have a 3. They both have an x. So 3x would be our greatest common factor. That's what we pull out. Okay? And again, the stuff in the parentheses, you can either do the division, like a reverse distributive, or you can look at the leftovers and see what we got. Let's do the division. So what times 3x would give us 3x squared? Well, we'd need another x in there, right? So 3x times x would be 3x squared. And then what times 3x would give us -15x? Well, it would be a -5. -5. We're going to still bring down this equal to 0. Okay? And if you weren't sure right here how I got these x minus 5s again, well, you can always use the prime factorization tree and say, all right, what was left over? We had our 3 and our x. Well, we had a -1 and a 5 here, which would give us our -5. And -1, -5, or -1 and 5 would give us the -5 here. And we have an x right here to get this x here. Okay, so there are multiple ways to do it. You can do it by division. You can do it by memory, just by knowing it, by knowing your basic facts. Or you can use the prime factorization table like we did up here and use your common factors for your GCF and the leftovers for your in the parentheses. Either way, you got to do it. You got to figure out a way how to do this because we're going to keep factoring over and over and over again now. All right, so now we're in a situation where we've got 2 factors equal to 0. And I know this one's not in a parenthesis, but it's because it's being multiplied, we are okay to move on here. So we're going to take each piece, 3x, set it equal to 0. Put that right there. And then we're going to take this whole x minus 5 and set that equal to 0 as well. Now on this side, how would we solve for x? Well, we just divide by 3. And so now we know that 0 divided by 3 is 0. So one of our factors is 0. And the other one over here, one step, just got to add 5 to both sides, and we get x equal to positive 5. And we are good. Okay? Let's try number 4. Number 4, I'm just going to do straight with, just kind of going by mentally knowing this and dividing. But if I'm going to pull out a GCF here, what do both these have in common? Oh, first, one step we got to do first is we don't have step 1 done yet. We don't have it equal to 0. We don't have everything on both sides. So I'm going to have to subtract 12y squared from both sides. And if it helps, you can put your dotted line here on the equation. So now I'm going to have a 4y minus 12y squared equals 0. That's what we want for step 1. Now I've got to factor it for step 2. I'm just going to draw a line here just to keep all the stuff separate. Now I've got to factor it for step 2. So when we factor this thing, I'm going to try to take what these have in common. Well, it looks like both 4 would go into both of them. It also looks like both of them have a y. So I'm going to pull out a 4y as my greatest common factor. And then inside, I'm thinking, what times 4y equals 4y? Well, just 1. 4y times 1 equals 4y. And then I'm going to have what times 4y equals negative 12y squared? Well, I'd have to go a negative 3 to get my 12. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. And then I'm going to also have to have a y in there as well, because y times y would be y squared. Set that equal to 0. Now I can do both pieces again, set them equal to 0. So I'm going to take this 4y, go 4y equals 0. I'm going to take this 1 minus 3y, make that equal to 0, and now I'm going to solve. Here I just have to divide by 4, and I can see that y is going to be equal to 0, because 0 divided by 4 is 0. And over here, I'm going to first, it's going to be a two-stepper, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So I have negative 3y equals negative 1. And then I'm going to divide by a negative 3. So then I'm going to have a y equals a negative 1 over negative 3, but I also know that a negative divided by negative makes a positive, so it would be a positive 1/3 here. Be careful with those. So that would be my answer, 0 and 1/3. So we want to make sure that we do everything step by step here. Again, going back to the top, check it out. We had to move this 12y squared over to the other side to set it equal to 0. That was step 1. Get everything on one side, set it equal to 0. Step 2 was to factor it, which we did here. And then step 3 was to set them equal to 0 and solve. Okay? So really factoring everything is the same. It's just going to be setting them equal to 0 and solving. All right, we can do some of these in class. You can also do them on your own. And now to the lesson summary. If there are already parentheses in an equation, do you need to factor? And why or why not? Don't just give me a yes or no answer. Explain why or why not. And then the practice problem here is to solve 4x squared plus 6x equals 0. So you're going to, it looks like step 1's already done for you. You got everything on one side of the equation. The other side is 0. You're going to have to factor it and then set them equal to 0 and solve. I'm guessing you're going to get a fraction here just by looking at the numbers. So don't be alarmed if that happens. Okay, that's it for section 8.5C and really 8.5. So bring any questions you have, and we'll go at it again next time.